Hello and welcome then. We are on episode 18 this week and we are looking this time at peripheral vision and what does peripheral vision mean and how does it impact on teaching. So let's get into this. Hello then, welcome back to this week's episode 18, where we're looking at peripheral vision. So basically it means that what we're using with our eyesight and kind of how we're using it in the classroom. I'm going to read a couple of things out because hopefully I'll explain it a little bit more in detail. Peripheral vision is basically part of our vision that occurs outside of our normal gaze. So if you're not sure what it really means, it means that kind of if we're focusing on something, so I'm looking directly at you. If I'm looking directly at you, I'm still seeing what's going on because I see my hands moving on the screen with the audio recording. And it means that I can be aware of other things that are going on around me. So how this comes into use in general sort of daily life is when we're walking down the road, we might be looking at where we're going down the street, but we're still aware of other vehicles and things around us. So it's kind of like a safety thing, and really, so it's make us aware of dangers around us. So how does that kind of relate to being in the classroom? Well, it's really useful for behaviour because more often than not, we're not always looking at the student who's doing something wrong. If they are doing something wrong, we don't focus too much on the negativity, but what we do want to do is be aware of what's going on in the classroom. So certainly when I was taught back in my training years as a PE teacher, we were taught to stand in corners of the room. So that's kind of like my first tip, really, is don't just stand right at the center. You always want to be standing to the side. So if you think about a kind of like a rectangle, if you stood in the middle of it, you can only really kind of see directly one corner or the other. If you turn to one side, you've kind of got this blind spot down this side here, and if you turn to the other side, you've got a blind spot there. Whereas if you stand in the corner of the room, it goes back to similar what we talked about in seating plans. If you stand in the corner of the room, then you can be aware, kind of, you're looking at the corner of the rectangle, you're looking in a cone shape across the whole of the room. Well, why is that important? Well, students will notoriously, going back to what we talked about positive framing last week and being really certain about whether students have done things wrong in a lesson, students will often try and do things when you're not looking. One of the best strategies you can use is if you think someone's done something, like we mentioned last week, and you're going to go with that idea. If you're not certain with something, assume there's a kind of misunderstanding on their behalf or your behalf, you can still acknowledge and say, look, I know somebody's talking over there. Please stop talking, and I'll come back to you in a second. If it continues, what you want to do really is look over the other side of the room and you're talking to a student over here. So you're focusing on like this other student, you're talking to them. But what I'm actually doing is watching what they're doing in the corner here. Now, I've done this in assemblies before to point out to students to try and deter them from doing things. So when I'm talking in an assembly and I've got, 200-300 students in front of me, depending on which school I've been working in the past or even present, I'll be talking to a student and I'll say, right, I'm going to do an experiment today. I'm going to talk to you about peripheral vision and why it's important. And we talk about the dangers in life and how we can be aware of what's going on when we're walking down the road. So we're relating it to them. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to sneakily kind of refer back and talk to them about behavior and why it's important that they must focus on what they're doing, because we want them to regulate their own behavior. So what I'll say to them is, look, what you need to be aware of is as I'm talking to you, and I might say like Jimmy down here, I'm talking to you, Jimmy. And as I'm talking to you, I'm still watching what's going on over there with Sarah. And I'll do an example. So say, Sarah, what I want you to do in a second, when I'm talking to Jimmy, I just want you to, at some point, put your hand up. And when you put your hand up, I'm going to put mine up. So I'll be talking. And it never ceases to amaze me how often I do this. And students will still have the same response of like, wow, it's like amazing. It's like, it's not really, it's just something really basic. But they don't realize you can do it. So it's like my number one tip for teachers when you're trying to deal with behavior is to use your peripheral vision. That means that when you're talking to another student, you're still watching what's going on around the room. It's incredibly powerful. Like I say, going back to the demonstration where I'll do it, and then the student puts up a hand, I put up my hand, and everyone goes, "Ooh!" It's like it's. They think it's kind of amazing, when it's not really. But what you're demonstrating to them is that you're watching at all times. Now that works for you because what it means is they're going to be like, he might sometimes be watching when we're not looking, and sometimes I think it's quite clever to do it where, using peripheral vision, you'll watch something happen and you can pick up a student for it. What I like to sometimes do is if I see someone chewing, I think, right, I've looked over at them and they kind of stopped chewing. So what I'll do is I'll walk over here and I'll talk to them, say, but I'll talk. And I'm just watching the corner of mine. As soon as I start seeing them chewing again, I'll just go, James, do me a favor, just stop chewing, please. And I'm not even looking at him, but he'll kind of go, what? And I go, just go and put it in the bin for us. And it's that idea of like, they're just kind of going, how did he know that? When was he looking? When did he pick that up? And it's just keeping them on their toes a little bit. Some people might say it's sneaky. I don't think it is. I think it's just basically saying to them, look, I'm aware of everything going on in the room. They tend to think that, like, you've got cameras everywhere else. So I don't know. But it's just something to be over. So it's kind of, expanding your toolkit, really. It's one of those more advanced tips, I suppose, in terms of behavior management, because normally when we talk about behavior management, we're talking about that direct, dealing with them in the moment, looking at them, talking to them. This is something that you're looking at in terms of your kind of wider skills that it takes a while to practice and get used to it, but that ability to watch what's going on. And it is quite strange, because sometimes when I'm looking at a student and looking directly at them, they don't even know I'm looking at them. Actually, how many times I've looked at a student to talk to them and they think I'm talking to the person behind. It's like looking at the eye contact, direct eye contact, but also that ability to kind of look around the room and still be watching what someone's doing. So you can just say, like, James, I just want you to put your pen down there, please. Just hold on a second while make sure we're all listening. And they'll be like, but he wasn't even looking at you. How did he know that? And it's just keeping them on their toes. The more you do that, the more they'll just think like you're really in control of the room. So it's a great skill to have. It allows you to kind of detect disruptions and understand what's going on in the room. It's often, most times people refer to it as like having eyes in the back of your head. And if you mix that skill up of peripheral vision with the ability to kind of like see something and don't say something until you walk over somewhere else and just go, oh, just do me a favor, this. Obviously, you're mixing this up with the things I've said before. I don't want people to kind of say, well, you said before about low level, just going down, kneeling next to them, talking to them and telling them they're doing something wrong. I'm like, yeah, that's fine. You've got to pick the right strategy for the right situation. I think where you've got to be careful sometimes when you're giving advice on anything in teaching, whether it be sort of teaching and learning, whether it be about behavior management, is it's not always about just doing the same thing or the one thing. You've got to mix up the strategies. And when the strategy doesn't work, you go to another one. Too often people go, well, you said we should never do this and you said we should always do that, and then like I contradict myself because I say do the other ones. It's like, well, you've got to pick the right one for the right situation. So when I'm talking about saying something when I'm on the other side of the room to another child over there, I've got to judge, A, is that a good thing for them, depending on the type of child, because if it's just not going to work, don't use the strategy. Okay, if you know that by saying, Jimmy, take out your chewing gum when I'm on the other side of the room, he's going to have a big kickoff, then you've used the wrong strategy. But if you know that you can say it because that student's going to go, oh, well, I see me, and they're going to react in the right way, then use the strategy. So just be careful about how you're using it and who you use it with. Don't just take everything that we say as being kind of like, well, that's the way I have to do it. You've got to use it for the right person at the right time. So just in conclusion, really, peripheral vision is like the ability to kind of not necessarily look at detail stuff. It's just having kind of like that aware of what's going on around you and what's going on in the room, so that you can just keep an eye on things. It's great, like I say, when you're talking to a student. I always find if I'm talking to a student, I'm not just focusing on them. I'm always using my peripheral vision. I'm always thinking, like, as I'm talking to them, what's somebody doing over there? What's somebody doing over there? And if you can use that and you can learn that skill, then you're going to find behavior management in the classroom a lot easier. So it's a short one really this week, but I think it's just something I picked up. I was talking to couple of other colleagues this week, and I'd used it myself in an assembly when I was talking with the new year sixes coming into year seven as part of transition. And I just explained to them a little bit about, we're always watching you type thing, we're always keeping an eye on you, make sure you're safe, and using it in a positive way, not just saying like we're picking on them. But they found it quite useful in terms of feeling like, like they're aware of everything that's going on. So I shared it with a couple of other people. I've shared it with some trainee teachers because they found it quite a useful skill to kind of adopt and use in the classroom. So hopefully that's used to you, and we'll see you in the next one. Take care. Thanks very much.